Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita, Kansas government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita, Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, well, just visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter, like Voice for Liberty on Facebook, and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. This week, my guest is Rodney Wren. He is a teacher of government and economics and also a debate and forensics coach. While in college, he won 9 debate and forensics national championships. He also has practical experience in politics, having been chair of the Harvey County Republican Party. He was also a speechwriter for Mike Pompeo during his first campaign for Congress in 2010. He appears regularly, as I do, as a panelist on This Week in Kansas, which is broadcast on another television station. Here, my conversation with Rodney Wren. Well, Rodney Wren, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Pleasure to be here.
So, on August 6th, we had the first debate for the Republican presidential candidates. That was hosted by Fox News in Cleveland, Ohio, and it was a big ratings smash through. They said 24 million people, which is, I don't know if that's getting up to Super Bowl level or something, but for a political candidate debate, when it's going to be like 5 or 6 months before people vote in the primaries, that's a lot of people. So, as a professional debate coach, is what we saw on August 6th, is that an actual debate? Or if it's not a debate, what would you call it?
It's not a debate. Political debates now, and it's probably been this way for a long time, especially with the invention of television. And the more that people have relied on television for their news and less on the print media, what you see are sound bites. And how can I fit in a rehearsed soundbite that I hope will be like throwing red meat to potential supporters, and B, a little bit of trying to, for the sports analogy, they want that replay. They want various networks. They don't, it's almost any press is good press, but not necessarily quite like that. But they want something that's going to get repeated and repeated, and preferably something that was really good. But that's really what our political debates, at least election time coming around, really have devolved to. If you wanted to go to something that would be, in my opinion, what a political debate should be like, you'd have to go back to something like the Lincoln-Douglas debates, where you had two people for an hour and a half talking about one issue. And no secret, I was a big fan of Newt Gingrich's candidacy 4 years ago after Herman Cain dropped out. That was part of what Newt wanted to do. Is he said, I want to challenge President Obama. I want to debate him one-on-one, one issue at a time. Let's do 8 or 9 of them, so you actually get a thorough discussion, some back and forth. You can get deep into the topics. And, we can talk about as the show goes on. I felt on a number of occasions, and even the guy who I'm liking a lot right now, Dr. Ben Carson, there are more than one occasion for most of them up there. They're trying to fit in. They might be asked a question, but if they can fit in something that's prepackaged or a talking point that they're comfortable with, that kind of gets to the question, they're going to do it. Because depending on how well funded the campaign is, it might even be focused group tested as far as what kind of response that candidate's going to already have practiced. So,
and I think I heard, I think before the debates on Fox News, there was a show where the three moderators were talking about getting ready for the debates,
right.
and they specifically said that they were trying to formulate questions that would knock the candidates off their talking points, which is, I think, is what you're talking about.
And I think that any moderator who's an actual journalist, of course, is going to say that. But again, because there's been many people that have ran for president who certainly were not a professional, didn't have professional staffs. They don't go through some of this kind of stuff. And just to quickly even talk about here in Kansas, the last governor's race, Keene Umber. I mean, you listen to Brownback, you listen to Davis, you listen to Keene. It was clearly two professional politicians, and then a gentleman who was speaking from the heart and honestly trying to answer the question, as opposed to just trying to finagle some talking points into there. But Brett Baer, Megyn Kelly, Chris Wallace, they can sit and say all day long they really thought of tough questions. At the same time, and I made no bones about this on Facebook, a lot of the questions weren't necessarily gotcha questions, but they were questions which they thought, I think, was going to get some heat. And certainly it's like in football. I mean, football would be boring if there wasn't any interaction, obviously. Those debates can get awfully boring if there's no interaction. So that Chris Christie, Rand Paul interaction, that was baited. I mean, clearly. So I'm just not a big fan of those.
Take, like, I think at the very beginning, Rand Paul kind of jumped up at Donald Trump when there was the question about, would you pledge not to run as a third or independent party or something like that if you don't get this nomination. So and of course with 10 people on a stage, and there were 7 people on a smaller stage beforehand, it's really hard to give any person much time to respond to anything at all. So Rodney, hold on to those thoughts there, because we're going to take a commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment on Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. With me this week, Rodney Wren. Now, Rodney, you're talking about the debates. I think probably after the debate, one of the biggest controversies was the question that Megyn Kelly asked of Donald Trump. She brought up some of the things he had said, disparaging comments about women. Trump contested that, but that then led to just a whole lot of spat, especially some things that the Donald said the day afterwards. So does that type of stuff give us more insight into the candidates, or is it just for fun that people make such a big deal about these things?
I was of the opinion, and still am, that what Megyn Kelly asked Trump was a good question. It was a fair question. Donald Trump hasn't run for office before. Libertarians generally don't like Donald Trump because of Kelo versus New London, Connecticut, the Supreme Court case there, and all the background. We just don't know much about Donald Trump unless you read maybe Fortune 500 or what you've seen if you watch The Apprentice or Celebrity Apprentice. But as a public figure, as a potential policymaker, as a presidential candidate, I think it's a legitimate question to test, ask questions, to allow the American people, and admittedly right now Republicans, is Donald Trump presidential material? I think Megyn's question was probative. There might have been also something there to kind of test to see how he responded. And I thought he did
responded under a bit of baiting.
Right, absolutely. But again, someone who, in the world of competitive debate, you ask those kind of probative questions during cross-examination. To me, that's just good journalism. That's just to try to figure out, what is this guy really going to be about? What's he going to be like as a public figure, the public figure in the world? And I think Trump failed on multiple occasions.
And maybe a difference is that in a professional debate, like you teach in high school, the issues are created by the debate sponsor, whoever, and the teams pick sides, or someone picks sides for them. One is for and one is against. So they're not really debating, this is what I believe.
Sure.
They're doing research, they're trying to find facts and presenting those facts in a persuasive way. These presidential debates, the participants are trying to sell themselves. And that, I think, is a little bit different, I think, emotional type of, I can't think of the word, but yeah.
It should be, but it should also mean that these candidates are more polished, and it should be an easier sell. But again, you have to remember that there's so much not cajoling, but contorting by all their staffers, their aides, their consultants to say what's electable, to say the right thing. And I think some of them more than others. I don't think Ted Cruz probably has too many consultants in that manner. But they're
maybe
trying
Scott Walker, because one of the conventional things is that Scott Walker seemed to be very lackluster, not compared to the Donald Trump. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask about, too, that a lot of people are attracted to Trump, or at least are interested because they say he speaks without the filter. He says what's on his mind. And I think, well, that's kind of good, because you can look right in there and see, and maybe you like it or maybe you don't. But at least he's giving us, I think, a look.
And I would agree with a lot of that. But to me, what that kind of tells me is Republicans and Republican activists are angry, and they just want someone to say what they're feeling. And so I'm not surprised, and there's been some other people that have said what I also think here, not surprised that Donald Trump, because he's so brash, he's so in your face, he's really just expressing the anger, frustration, lament of the Republican base.
There is kind of a similar thing going in the other party with the challenge, the surprisingly strong challenge that Bernie Sanders is giving to Hillary Clinton, who I think is probably the most scripted, test-focused candidate ever.
Right.
And now you've got people like Al Gore and Joe Biden thinking about taking a look, because Hillary really has not done very well on her campaign.
Well, and it's going to be interesting, and I'm not a tinfoil hat person. The Obamas really don't like the Clintons. I think there's been a lot written about that. I don't think, and if you're the Michelle Malkins of the world, or a number of other right-wing type of columnists, you might think that the Obama administration is largely corrupt. I don't see the Department of Justice, the Obama Department of Justice, giving Hillary Clinton a free pass on this whole email thing. I think they're going to go after her. And who would Barack Obama rather have as president, Hillary or a Bernie Sanders?
Or Joe Biden.
But I think that was political in that choice of Joe Biden for another reason we won't discuss on camera. But I think that a Bernie Sanders, who's really just the honest version of Barack Obama, would be someone who Barack would really like to see the Democrat nominee. So I won't be surprised if the DOJ goes after Hillary really hard on this issue.
And of course, Bernie Sanders is an admitted socialist.
Absolutely.
But you remember a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday show, someone asked the chair of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, can you explain the difference between a Democrat and a socialist? And she was she was flustered and not able to come up with a response.
I have many friends who are Democrats and who are liberals and probably socialists, and they don't like this answer. A socialist is just an honest Democrat.
Okay.
And I mean, Debbie can't say that because she doesn't want to blow her cover. But I mean, really, the Democrat Party of the last 20, 30, if not since FDR, has been about statism, government control of the market, redistribution of wealth. How's that not socialism?
Yeah, some of the hallmarks of at least socialist states
Absolutely.
that we have there. So, well, Rodney, hang on to those thoughts one more minute, because we're going to take a moment for a commercial break. We'll be back with Wichita Liberty TV in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, this week with Rodney Wren. So, Rodney, talking about the presidential debates, what should the average voter be looking for to try to figure out who they should support, who they should think about voting for in the primaries and caucuses next year?
To the chagrin of the network television stations and the cable news networks, don't go there. Okay. It's an echo chamber. I don't think you are really going to learn all that much. Now, for the undecided voter, which has always kind of been a mystery to me, and maybe it's just because I get on board with somebody pretty early, you got to do what most Americans, God love them, don't want to do because they don't have the time or they're not interested, and this is America. Do what you want. You got to go to their website. You got to read about them. You got to go to a number of sources, and you've got to try to get a holistic picture of this person, because what you're getting on these televised debates is no different than the Rusty Eck Ford TV commercial or the Mel Hambleton Ford TV commercial or the Davis Moore Chevrolet commercial. You're getting a sales job in the form of a debate or a forum. I think the only thing you can glean from these televised debates really is somewhat of an information of what this person would look like as president, and purely from an audio-visual standpoint. Again, I'm a big fan of Dr. Carson, but as a professional communicator, his gestures bug me to the nth degree. And so if any of his people are watching, I'd be more than happy to give him a little coaching. And that's for a number of those candidates. But
he's usually described as someone who comes across as very genuine.
I absolutely do think so. He's very thoughtful. He's kind of soft-spoken. But those gestures are always right here, and it's just not the best. But a number of them have...
Maybe not suited for a career in politics if he's thoughtful and soft-spoken, and who knows. Well, I wanted to ask about one of the clear winners, I think, of the debate, at least according to the conventional wisdom, was Carly Fiorina, who was not on the main stage. She was on the stage earlier, but people say, boy, she was really well-spoken, and maybe that's just she practiced better with her talking points than other candidates, but she seems to have gained a lot of traction, at least in the polls after that debate.
And you'll have to, I was not able to watch the first one. Was it an hour and a half long like the second one was?
I think so. I don't recall. But...
So you're talking 7 candidates versus 10, so they probably got to talk more amongst those 7 than they did amongst those 10. Carly Fiorina is a captivating speaker. I've seen her give speeches at CPAC and elsewhere. Certainly somebody had to arise from that bottom tier. And more than likely there's going to be, if future hosts of the debates still kind of stick with that top tier, bottom tier structure, some of the people are probably going to go down to that bottom tier. I can't see Chris Christie staying much longer in that top tier. Now, I'll also say very quickly, I think these national polls are a joke. The national polls do not give us an indication of what's going to happen in the primary. The Iowa polls, the New Hampshire polls, the South Carolina polls are going to tell us what's happening.
Because the system is so front-loaded that just in a handful of the early states, those are the voters that really have a say, which some people think is good, other people think it's bad. But, remember Jimmy Carter campaigning in Iowa in 1975 or 76. He stayed with people and slept on their sofa, and that's how shoestring you can run a campaign in Iowa. Couldn't do that if he had to campaign across the entire country or even a big section of it.
Sure. And Iowa is completely about retail politics. And from what I understand, New Hampshire is too. I'm not saying I know what the best solution to that is, but we're not having a national primary. So I think it's foolhardy for those networks to decide the positioning, the prominence of questions for a particular candidate based off national polls. And again, I don't know what the better solution is, maybe some kind of average of polls from the first 3 states. Because historically, If the first candidate wins, or if the person who wins Iowa, they might come in second, New Hampshire, but if they also win South Carolina, it's over. Unless you're Ron Paul, you might carry it out, but really, it's over. 4 years ago, went a long ways. 8 years ago for the Democrats, went a long ways. It will be interesting to see how far it goes this time, because again, when you're so spread out, that means the pool of support is spread out. The pool of money is spread out. So at some point, something's got to give. And we know from media reports, Rick Perry is not even paying his staff in South Carolina anymore.
Yeah, so he could be in trouble there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably about the last question before we have to sign off. Do people need to separate the message from the way it's being said? And I always hate to bring up, whenever you bring up a Hitler analogy, but remember Adolf Hitler, he stirred up the German people into frenzy of emotion. He was a tremendously gifted speaker as far as getting people to do what he wanted. Of course, he wanted them to do things that were absolutely evil and, really set the world into a war where, 50 million people or so died. So do we need to be very careful to make sure that we're not captivated, let's say, by someone like Carly Fiorina, who did a very good debate performance as far as these are debates, but maybe her message isn't the type of thing we should really want?
The answer is yes and no. As a professional communicator, I'm a big fan of Aristotle. You have to have the logic-based evidence portion, you have to have the credibility portion, and you have to have the passion portion. Mm-hmm. Some of these folks like Ted Cruz sounds like a Southern Baptist preacher. That's great for those kind of people. That's not necessarily who I might want. Mm-hmm. So you just have to be careful. But that's where it's important, I think, to go and do and gather a breadth of research about these candidates, so you're not just caught up in the wave of support for these people, which not entirely coincidentally is why our founders gave us the Electoral College, so somebody just couldn't ride a wave of emotion to the White House.
Yeah, and that's interesting thought there. So, well, Rodney Wren, thanks for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you,
It's
Bob.
been a pleasure. And that's all again this week for Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back again next week with another episode. I'm Bob Weeks.